I don't remember when I bought Valfaris, but I do know that its genre and visuals are what initially appealed to me. It also holds the honor of being the first game I played and beat on my Steam Deck. I realize that might not be a big deal or worth mentioning, but it definitely affected how I played and enjoyed Valfaris. It's not every day that I find a game that combines two of my hobbies. In Valfaris' case, it's video games and metal. I know that this isn't the first time that metal's been a part of a game, either through the soundtrack, gameplay, or references, but I like that Valfaris managed to create a balance that didn't come off as obnoxious. It might be weird for me to be saying that, seeing as how I'm a longtime metalhead, but every now and then the genre and some of its fans have ways of going too overboard. Thankfully, that wasn't the case with Valfaris. Even to someone that's not a music aficionado, it's clear that Valfaris is influenced by metal. The OST is largely metal, though there are occasional moments where other kinds of music are used, and the main character is a long-haired headbanger. To someone like me, there was more that stood out. I loved how one of the achievements was titled Be Quick or Be Dead, which was clearly a reference to the Iron Maiden track. I also liked how one of the weapons was called the Hellhammer. I haven't listened to their music as much as I probably should have, but I still know how important they were to the development of black metal and their connection to Tom G. Warrior and Celtic Frost. I wouldn't go so far as to say that Valfaris' metal influences affected how it's played, but it helps showcase the passion the dev clearly has for metal and video games. From the start, I was really enjoying myself. It's not only because of the novelty of playing Valfaris on the Steam Deck, but also because of its visuals. I liked how colorful, detailed, and atmospheric they came off. I also liked how consistent it was. The game largely had a dark color palette, but it was done in such a way that it didn't take away from the experience. It wasn't just with the actual gameplay itself, but also with the backgrounds. All of this helped to feel the world of Valfaris alive, and I like that a lot. This led to me thinking that Valfaris was one of the more relaxing games I've recently played, and I enjoyed it. It was easy to pick up and play thanks to my Steam Deck, but also because Valfaris could be played in both short and long sessions. For some games it's either or, but Valfaris being this way made it so that I played more often because I didn't have to worry about creating a large block of time for me to game. It also helps that Valfaris is a game that I bought for myself, whereas some of the games I've recently reviewed were given to me. The point isn't to speak badly of those games, but it's easier for me to go into a game knowing that I'll have a good time based on how much I've seen of it, and also because I already know I'll enjoy it. There have been some games that I've purchased for myself that left me unhappy, but those are few and far between. With games that I've received keys for, that's a more frequent occurrence because I don't always know as much as I should. I don't know if it'll be bug-free, if it'll be repetitive, or if it's just really low quality. My point isn't to say that Valfaris is a perfect game, but I found it highly enjoyable because it wasn't just a one-trick pony. It was able to cover all of its bases in a way that ranged from good to great, and that's not something I can say about every game I review. Initially, I stuck to the story because it was easy to get up close and personal to the enemies without having to second guess things. I'd frequently find new weapons and I was happy to see that there was a diverse set to choose from, but I felt comfortable sticking to what felt right to me. I did, however, suspect that I'd eventually have to change up my loadout because of how many weapons there were. It was also because the game would gently force you as a result of the enemies/general obstacles that change when you least expected it to. I knew that I'd likely be better off changing things up, but it also didn't help, or in my case did help, that Valfaris has a simple upgrade system. I see an upgrade system like this and I wish that more games would do the same because I don't want to overthink things. I don't want to look at a skill tree and think that I'm one skill point away from making my character unusable in one way or another. The simple upgrade system made it so that I immediately knew how my weapon would change as a result of being upgraded, but also why it was worth upgrading in the first place. This led to me being able to focus on what I consider more important, the gameplay itself. Valfaris isn't the kind of game where you dissect its level design such as with Elden Ring's Royal Capital, which I absolutely love, but there's enough here to write about. What stood out to me about Valfaris' level design was how close by checkpoints usually were from each other. That can go either way, depending on your preferences, but I like this because it tied into me being able to decide when to play and when to stop. When you add in being able to put the Steam Deck to sleep and then being able to immediately continue from where you left off, you've got a really nice situation going there. Despite thinking that the art style in Valfaris was awesome and there was plenty of detail to keep you entertained, I felt that there wasn't much to offer when it came to world exploration. It's worth noting that there were seamless transitions from one area to the next, which I really appreciated, but I would have liked something less straightforward. There were occasional moments where I'd stumble into a reward or challenge thanks to exploring, but this part of the game felt more like an afterthought. Overall, I'd say that the levels and areas played out more like something you'd see in Contra. I don't have a problem with that at all, seeing as how Contra is rightfully a beloved game, but this made me think less of the arranging of levels, even if only slightly. I realize it might come off as weird to be complaining about one aspect of the levels 1 minute and then praising another the next, but that's exactly what I'm doing. The levels weren't as open-ended as I would have liked them to have been, but I liked how their obstacles were combined and used against you. There were moments of more traditional platforming, but there were also occasions where you were forced to alter your playstyle. This was due to having to juggle multiple mechanics at once. I could be firing at an enemy while cautiously attempting to jump between platforms, and there were other occasions where I'd be hanging onto a rope or a flying worm while trying to avoid taking damage or being shocked. Honestly, in some of those situations I was my own worst enemy. In attempting to avoid damage or trying to go from one platform/worm to the next, sometimes I jumped straight into electricity or doomed myself in some other similar fashion. That's really more of an observation in regards to how much Valfaris would sometimes simultaneously throw obstacles at you. Speaking of having things thrown at you, I generally felt that the boss battles in Valfaris were well handled. The bosses weren't pushovers, but there were also moments where I felt like a better player than I really am because of being able to beat the Twin Tomb Keepers during my first attempt. What I most liked about the bosses were their rooms. It wasn't the case with every boss, but some managed to really stand out because of how they were designed. There was one that was pretty close to being like Pac-Man. The boss would chase you around and you also had obstacles to deal with while trying to dish out damage. The room design forced you to play a certain way and the occasional restrictions led to moments of creativity. While not completely the same, I still enjoyed some of the themed boss fights. There was a computer boss that had me confused because during the first 1 or 2 attempts I assumed that it'd be like the other bosses I'd already dealt with. That wasn't the case at all with this boss. It was initially a puzzle because it wanted to test your intelligence as a result of thinking little of you. The thematic and gameplay elements lined up perfectly and I really liked that. It's because it was a shift away from the typical shoot at anything that moves. While some of the bosses stood out to me, others didn't deliver on the same level. In fact, that left me thinking that some of the areas that featured gauntlets of enemies were harder to deal with than some of the bosses. It's kind of how Dark Souls sometimes has a bonfire away from the boss room, and on your way there you have to face a bunch of enemies. In Dark Souls, the enemies and boss more or less offer the same kind of challenge, but that wasn't the case in Valfaris. Sometimes I'd really struggle with the gauntlets of enemies only to reach a boss and realize that they were a pushover. It's not really that big of a deal, but it still leaves me thinking that I would have preferred had things been better balanced like some of the boss fights that stood out to me for positive reasons. I felt that the bosses ranged from easy to medium, but the final boss really caught me off guard. It's because the difficulty jump from the other bosses to this one was huge. It wasn't just because the final boss had 3 forms, but also because I was forced to deal with it with what I had gathered/upgraded by that point. That left me thinking that it would have been nice for Valfaris to have let me know that I was reaching the point of no return, like some other games do. Had I known that I was heading towards the final boss, I would have tried to upgrade my weapons as best I could. Instead, I had to experiment a lot, change my playstyle in order to beat the boss, and it took longer than I would have liked to finally beat it. I hate to admit it, but I looked up tip videos on YouTube in order to get a better idea of what kind of playstyle/weapons were ideal for overcoming this final boss. I eventually realized that I could parry some of its attacks. I'd previously done that with general enemies, but seeing as how this was the final boss, I assumed my parries wouldn't help at all. Had I known this much sooner, I would have avoided a lot of frustration from fighting it over and over again. Once I realized that I could parry its head slams, the fight was less intimidating than it initially appeared to be. I know that I could parry more than just its head slams, but those attacks were the ones I most felt comfortable parrying. Everything else could be dealt with either my shield or simply avoiding projectiles thanks to plain old dodging. Valfaris isn't the first or last type of game where I go in with small expectations and end up thinking it over-delivered. The point isn't to make it seem like I went in thinking this game would just be okay, but seeing as how I sometimes expect the game to offer greatness and end up disappointed, I go in with a let's see how things turn out kind of mentality. The fact that Valfaris is described as an action platformer says a lot about what kind of game it is, but at the same time, there's more to it besides that. Whether it's impressive retro-styled visuals, its metal references, or some of the interestingly designed boss rooms, there's plenty to enjoy about this game. If it isn't obvious by this point, I definitely recommend Valfaris. Some moments might be frustrating to deal with, but it's the kind of game that rewards you for putting up with its challenges. Do games that deliver the goods with certain aspects leave you expecting more from others? Do you try to use all of the weapons that are made available to you, or do you stick to what you're most comfortable with? If you enjoyed this content, please feel free to like, comment, subscribe, and share. Thank you very much for watching.